Welcome to the second web talk of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation in 2021. I'm Andrea Spindle and the moderator for today. The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is a national charitable organization that is focused on awareness, education, and advocacy in confronting growing anti-Semitism. For almost 20 years, CAEF has been urging Canadians to pay attention to the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We have presented international experts on topics of Israel's rights, the Palestinian myths and lies, and the danger of ignoring the anti-Israel BDS movement. Today, CAEF is working to end Jew hatred, having taken the lead in establishing End Jew Hatred Canada, a partner with the grassroots movement founded by the Lawful Project in the US. You will learn about this movement from today's guest speaker and how you and every Jew in the country can participate. We must expand our efforts to confront Jew hatred and defend Jewish civil rights in Canada and Jewish rights to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. You can read the background to this movement on the CAEF website at www.caef.ca. And I urge everyone to visit the website endjewhatred.com to understand more about the mission and activities of the movement. Please donate to CAEF to help grow this grassroots Jewish civil rights movement. It's my pleasure to introduce Gerard Phility, who is Senior Counsel at the Lawful Project, a nonprofit legal entity established to protect and defend the civil rights of the Jewish people and the pro-Israel community. Gerard joined the Lawful Project after working as a litigator in private practice for over 15 years. His experience included commercial litigation across a wide variety of practice areas at both state and federal levels. He then pursued civil counterterrorism litigation with an emphasis on money laundering investigations, and he represented victims of international acts of terrorism. Gerard has an undergraduate degree from New York University and a master's degree from the University of London. He was a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of the UK and a scholar of the Middle East and Central Asia before graduating in law from the University of Michigan. Gerard's first published book is called Frozen Tide, a suspense thriller that follows the investigation of a terrorist attack on American soil, something we used to think could never happen. However, today we know that anything imaginable can happen. After Gerard presents, he will take questions from the audience, so I draw your attention to the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. Please use that if you have a question, and I will try to get to all of your questions. Welcome, Gerard.
Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all today. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of you for joining in this endeavor to end Jew hatred. We are proud and honored to have you all as partners in Canada, and we look forward to all the many things we can accomplish together. I remember last year as a year where we saw a lot of action for social justice. I don't think you were anywhere in the world with a TV where you didn't see what was going on in the cities of the US and overseas day after day with people coming together to fight for their civil rights and for what you need in order to succeed as a minority community. Well, the Jewish community has not had that. We have supported every civil rights movement out there. We marched with Martin Luther King Jr., which is, something we celebrated just this week. We have fought for civil rights and equality for every group imaginable, but we've never really stood up for ourselves. And that's something that End Jew Hatred came together to address, especially after seeing the success of these movements like BLM and the New Women's Movement and other groups that managed to unify together to fight for what they believe in, which is the need for civil rights, for equality under the law. So that is what End Jew Hatred is about. We demand a world without Jew hatred and anti-Jewish discrimination. We are a civil rights movement dedicated to ensuring Jewish liberation from centuries of persecution. We are the world's oldest, most persecuted minority, and we want to achieve justice for the Jewish community through peaceful, direct action. What we offer as a movement is the assets that every individual member and every organizational partner has to offer, whether it's legal, like the Lawful Project, whether it's mobilizing and educating people like our new partners in Canada, or whether it's pursuing the proper definition of Zionism and Zionist advocacy on campus, like Club Z. We all offer different things. Combined together, we have the ability to succeed and make ourselves be heard and affect positive change. So I wanted to give you all an example or a few examples of the things that we have worked on and achieved, so you have an idea of what we can all do together on a much larger scale. Last year in the US, we saw something very horrible on the campus of the University of Southern California. A few Zionist and Jewish student leaders were persecuted and hounded from their positions in government and student government by accusations and by denigration by people who could not stand the fact that they were pro-Zionist and that they identified themselves as Zionists and they loved their Jewish identity. They were pushed out of student government and basically hounded to the point that they were afraid to step foot on campus. This is the sort of thing that cannot go unaddressed. There need to be consequences for Jew hatred, just as there are consequences for any other type of racial or sexist or persecution of any minority group in the world. So End Jew Hatred came together. We mobilized in Los Angeles. We identified Rick Caruso, who is the chair of the board of trustees at USC, as a person who could help bring about meaningful change on campus. We contacted him with demands that he address this issue, that, for example, USC adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism as a guiding principle, that there be consequences for the students who broke the school's code and persecuted these Jewish students, and that there be meaningful education on anti-Semitism as distinct from any other racial or preliminary assessment of other ethnic groups, that anti-Semitism be addressed specifically and individually, and that every student and faculty member and staff at the school have training in what anti-Semitism is and how to prevent it, and the consequences, the legal consequences for violating the civil rights of Jewish community members. So what we did was we came together at the Grove. The Grove, for those of you who don't know, is a shopping center in Los Angeles, very luxurious and preeminent outdoor market that is owned by Rick Caruso. Hundreds of people came together with banners uniting us under the End Jew Hatred logo. We spoke, we marched, we protested, and we were heard. This is something that reverberated in the media and we received such positive effect from the Jewish community from what we did. And due to that, we were able to start the dialogue with the USC, with the Shoah Foundation, with Rick Caruso, and we are working to try to get changes done at USC. Now, that was the first action that we undertook. And since then, we have learned to refine how we do things and what we want to do. Not long after USC, we saw that Leila Khaled, who we all know is a notorious PFLP terrorist, and PFLP being a designated foreign terrorist organization. So this is, as we would call it, the big leagues. She was invited by the San Francisco State University by a program there that is known to be very anti-Semitic, known to espouse Jew hatred. She was invited to speak to students, essentially to indoctrinate them via Zoom. And we found this to be unacceptable and, quite frankly, illegal. So the Lawful Project wrote a letter to Zoom, to SFSU, to the government agencies, notifying them that this is something that was problematic and probably illegal under federal law. At the same time, and this is the crucial part, End Jew Hatred staged a protest outside of Zoom headquarters in San Jose, California. Zoom was very much aware that the protest was going on. I remember flying in to the protest, and as I was getting off the phone, I was on the phone, off the plane, excuse me, I was on the phone with counsel for Zoom, who asked whether the protest was going ahead as scheduled or whether it could be canceled. That's when we found out that Zoom was blocking access to the webinar and would not allow Leila Khaled to use its platform to spread terror. So the crucial thing here is that this was a collaborative effort. On the one hand, we were able to pursue legal remedies, but also more importantly, perhaps, we were able to mobilize people to go on the street and be heard. And this was a concern to Zoom because, among other things, they want to be seen as doing the right thing. But also when you have people standing on the street shouting that you are discriminating against them and you are harassing them, you will be heard. So this was essentially a 1-2 punch where we offered the legal situation and presented a situation that was unacceptable and potentially dangerous from penalty perspective, but also people came together. People came together and united to send the message that this was unacceptable. So between legal pressure and social pressure, Zoom did the right thing and canceled this webinar. And this was followed in short order by Facetube and Google YouTube taking it down and not allowing Khaled to speak. So more than anything, this shows how effective we can be when we come together and mobilize and put the different strengths of partner organizations to work to get things done. We achieved similar results with Twitter, which a lot of us saw in this past week. Holocaust denial is something that is atrocious and heads so many messages that have been offensive and hurtful to the Jewish community. This has been an issue that was circulating in the news for years because, as we all know, Twitter and a lot of the internet companies were basically not even looking at hateful conduct when it came to conduct directed at the Jewish community. If you directed race-filled invective towards the Black community or the Hispanic community, you were blocked, the tweets were deleted, you were deplatformed. But for whatever reason, Twitter, Facebook, all these social media platforms didn't seem to have much problem with Jew hatred. So with Twitter specifically, we saw an opportunity when the company declared that it would ban Holocaust denial. They did this in October 2020. They issued a statement essentially saying that Holocaust denial would be banned. Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, went before Congress and he gave somewhat of a confusing message. But after his testimony, Twitter came back and clarified that hateful conduct policy covered Holocaust denial. So there should not be any Holocaust denial tweets. People should be able to report them and Twitter should take them down. That's what they said their policy is, but that's not what the case is. If we go on Twitter now, even today, you will find very offensive and emotionally charged tweets that basically go to the heart of Jewish suffering in the 1900s. And this is completely unacceptable. So we called out Jack Dorsey on this. And it was a very timely issue because this is just when the protests were happening in Washington, D.C., and Twitter was banning, President Trump from speaking on Twitter and banning other groups and reducing basically their voices, diminishing them and throwing them off their platform for pursuing hate speech, but was not doing the same for Holocaust denial. So Jew-hatred activists took action. They got in a car with a loudspeaker and drove by Jack Dorsey's house and parked there and broadcast to him in a very German-sounding voice, reminiscent of Adolf Hitler, the same tweets that he allows to come into our homes and that expose our children and our families to hate. So he could hear for himself what it's like to have someone else direct hate into your home and not be able to do anything about it. And we followed that with a campaign where we sent almost 2,000 postcards to Dorsey's neighbors, showing them what Twitter was doing, what these hateful tweets were like, and asking them to tell their neighbor that this was unacceptable and that it needs to change. So from this is something that's still in progress. This just happened this past week. There are many more things we will be doing, including as part of this International Holocaust Remembrance Day vigils. We have activists who will be marching from the Holocaust Memorial that's very near, it's less than half a mile from Jack Dorsey's home, to his doorstep. And this is both in remembrance of the Holocaust, in remembrance of the suffering, and also reminding him and his neighbors and everyone who will listen that this is particularly the type of hate that he is allowing on his platform and that needs to change. So this is the type of community activism that we are finding very effective because it carries our message. This isn't just about writing letters or having a campaign on Twitter. This is about people showing up with signs, with megaphones, with voices, in cars, in a procession. The most important thing is to be heard. And that's what Jew-hatred is about. It's to amplify the voices of everyone who is part of this group, part of this movement. It's to be able to be heard and make ourselves be heard and push for changes so that the civil rights of the Jewish community are treated equally to every other minority community out there. This is a unique opportunity, and this is why it's so important for people to get involved and see the issues affecting their community and strategize what they can do to bring about change. With Twitter, it's fairly simple. You have a CEO, so you have a built-in target. You have someone you can address your concerns to. With California, with USC, it's a similar thing. You want to address your concerns to someone who's in a position to do something about it. But here's the catch, I'd say. It's not always a matter of addressing the person who is titularly in charge. At USC, most people would write a letter to Carol Folt, who's the president of the university. But she's salaried, she has a pension, she has a union backing her, she has all of the power to do absolutely nothing if she wants to. She has no incentive. People have no incentive to change anything if they're not pushed. A businessman like Rick Caruso, on the other hand, they are more cognizant of the economic cost of not doing the right thing. So pushing is important where you can actually have effect. With Zoom, we could easily have written letters to San Francisco State University, and believe me, we did. We have, one of my colleagues is very passionate about resolving these issues on campus because they've been going on for so long. So this is something that we are very keenly on top of, but merely addressing letters to a university doesn't always work. You need to apply pressure where you can have results. So in the case of SFSU and Leila Khaled, yes, letters to the university help, but going to the corporate side, going to the company that has shareholders, that has stock value, addressing that board, addressing that CEO, and telling him that there are legal consequences and social consequences for allowing Jew hatred, that's where you get results. So that's something that I urge all of you to consider when you are moving forward as activists or as members of the community. Think about where you want to address your concerns. It's not always about writing a letter to the editor or writing a letter to a school board. You have to consider, is there an individual that you can identify that might actually have the power to get things done? That's not to say that they will, but that's the sort of thing that you want to leverage and focus on as a civil rights movement. That's a lot of what the Black community did with BLM. They targeted politicians who were amenable to change, but they also targeted individual store owners, community leaders, community members, churches, anywhere that they could be heard and have their message conveyed to others in a way that would affect change. That's what they did. So that's what we're trying to do for our community, for a change, is to address our concerns to people who might actually be compelled to bring about change using the right pressure that's both legal and moral. And that's one of the things that we have done to great effect so far, and we hope to continue doing now that a lot more people are getting on board and are there to help us.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a number of questions that have come into me and some that are posted here. So first question. We know the impact of Black Lives Matter. It was less noisy and riotous here in Canada, but we certainly had Black Lives Matter rallies. Some of the undercurrent of the movement itself has been anti-Semitic. Do you foresee or have you experienced any opposition from BLM towards end Jew hatred?
We are not competing with BLM. We are in the business of fighting for Jewish civil rights. And quite frankly, BLM has been more concerned with their own agenda than with attacking other civil rights movements. So the short answer is no, we have not gotten any pushback or feedback or any interaction, positive or negative, from BLM.
Okay. Have any politicians come on board? We know that when BLM was happening, everybody took a knee and a lot of politicians spoke up, went to rallies, were very supportive. Are you seeing political support for EJH too?
I will say that I'm encouraged by the signs that we're seeing. You have to remember that when BLM came out, they've been around for 7 years now. And it was not in the first year that all these politicians, except for the more radical among them, came on board. It took time for the movement to fester and enter the popular consciousness to the point that politicians came on board. For now, I know that End Jew Hatred has received support from the Conference of Presidents, from a lot of leading figures in the Jewish community, and we are hopeful and we are working on dialogue with politicians all the time. And we plan, as they become more aware of who we are, to introduce ourselves, to pursue our agenda with them and through them. So I'm very hopeful that we will have politicians come on board and support our movement. And this is essentially why it is so important to have this movement, because without it, politicians aren't motivated to do anything. They speak about Israel, but they don't speak about the Jewish community. So that's what we want to change.
Do you have non-Jewish partners?
We absolutely do. We have some very strong non-Jewish partners, and I think it's very important to praise everyone who comes on board. We're open. The same way we have marched for so many other communities, we welcome people to come and march and support us. And I think it's essential that it's not, we are not a voice in a vacuum. We cannot be heard or understood in isolation. We are part of a larger community. We affect the community just as the community affects us. So yes, we have non-Jewish partners, and we're very happy to have them and very proud of them standing up and helping us in every way.
Can you speak to where pro-Israel Zionism fits into the EJH mission vision?
Sure. First, I wanted to comment that Zionism has often been, especially of late, politicized. It's been affiliated with a desire to support Israel or to be pro-Israel or to have a certain political leaning. Anti-hatred is not political. We don't frankly care who the Prime Minister of Israel is, and people are free to disagree about internal politics, policy, whatever that is. But we believe that Zionism is an inherent and an integral part of Jewish identity. And we have so many people who've spoken so eloquently about this topic. I certainly couldn't do it justice. And I think that there are people you should have to speak about it. But I will say that, we have commandments that involve the land of Israel. We have commandments that can only be performed in Israel. And Zionism speaks to that. Zionism speaks to our connection to Israel and to civil rights for the entire Jewish community. So I think it's fair to say that we strongly support Zionism as a core part of Jewish identity, but we avoid that aspect of Zionism that's denigrated into political terms by other groups, by other people, by people who want to do harm to the Jewish community.
The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation has become a partner. Can you talk a little bit about the role of partner organizations? There may be other organizations listening today, so that could be helpful.
Partner organizations and individual activists are the way that we can grow as a movement and augment each other's voices and get things done. So far, we have, I think, at last I know, 16 plus partner organizations, much like yours, who each have core strengths and competencies, who can mobilize people to the cause or to what needs to be done, and who also best understand their constituents and their community. So it's a matter of we welcome any group that wants to help to be a part of this, to contact us, to come on board, to join us, to work together, and to start chapters wherever we can. We now have a chapter, your chapter in Toronto. We have chapters in Los Angeles and New York City. We are looking overseas as well. These things are in progress and developing, and each chapter can best speak to the issues and act on the issues that affect their local community. Because who knows your community better than you do? You know what your needs are. You know what the issues are. As much as we want to be on top of everything throughout the world, you are in the best position to tell us, hey, this needs attention. We have a problem here. Someone denigrated, someone desecrated a temple, continually issuing threats to the Jewish community. Someone said this and it's hurtful and harmful. That's why we need chapters. We need chapters to be the eyes and ears of the movement, to identify what the problems are and to act on them. And in terms of the movement itself, we will support you. We pool resources. We are able to get social media content, to put together videos, to get press attention on this. We have strategists who are, this is what they do, is focus on conveying the message and carrying the day and taking the fight to where it needs to be taken. So we welcome partner organizations to come on board so they can share their experience and their knowledge of both what needs to be done and how to go about affecting change. And we encourage people to start chapters so that they can identify and fight for their own individual communities, because what happens in San Diego, what happens in Vancouver, what happens in Montreal, not that my French is any good, but it affects us all. So we need those local connections. We need people to come on board and to put their skills and knowledge to use in fighting this, fighting Jew hatred.
Okay, so you probably had this question asked before. How does asking Zoom to deplatform somebody deal with or preserve the concept of free speech?
It's not an issue of free speech, and it's not an issue of academic freedom. The biggest problem is that this is a designated terrorist organization. This is a person who could not get on a plane and fly to the US or Canada. They would be turned away. They'd be denied entry because they are a designated terrorist. So it's disingenuous to then say, well, if we turn them away, it's fine if they speak to us on Zoom. It's fine if they propagandize and pursue terrorism on the internet. It's not. That's a distinction without a difference. If they are barred from entering a country, if they are a designated terrorist whom it is illegal to provide material support for, it's not about what they say. It's about the person saying it. And as an intellectually honest lawyer, I will say, if it were anyone else but Leila Khaled, who was giving that webinar, we would not have been as effective. That's something that we need to pressure schools to change. That's something we need to pressure the community to change. But we are proud that we were able to cut off one terrorist from speaking and propagandizing. So it's not a free speech issue. We fight for free speech. We want to be heard. We want to hear diverging views. But when someone calls for the deaths of innocent civilians, when someone calls for killing Jews, that's not free speech, that's terrorism. And that's recognized as terrorism by so many governments as to make that particular person not eligible to speak.
Do you see Jew hatred having an impact or a direct action on mainstream newspapers that continually carry negative reporting on Israel?
I think that we will get to that point. The important thing is that everything needs to start somewhere. So we start with Jewish press, we start with community press. We've already been cited in national press, whether it's the New York Post or Fox News or the Washington Examiner. We are starting to develop that coverage that will allow us to impact what the media says. And that's part of the long-term growth strategy. Unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can make these changes and have these consequences overnight. This is something that takes time. But the more people that join, the more people that can amplify each other's voices, the more people that take action to be heard, that's how you get the media to pay attention and to start to affect what the media says and what the politicians say, which is why it's so crucial to have as many people come on board as want to join this fight.
Have you had any criticism from people who see this as, in parentheses, playing identity politics?
Sorry, playing what?
Identity politics, where now Jews are using characteristics or identifying specific rights, as opposed to saying civil rights applies to everybody. The Black anti-racist movement has segregated itself and said we have rights, and the Latino community and the LGBT community and the women's community, and now Jews are doing it. Is this going to just play into more division?
Well, the answer I have starts with a question. What can you do if you don't stand up for your rights as well? This is not a case in which Jews are sitting about passively, not experiencing any negative consequences. Jews are targeted every single day based on the simple fact and no other fact than that they are Jewish. So it's nice to think that we can all just have one civil rights movement that encompasses everyone. That is what it should be, quite frankly. Equal protection under the law should mean equal protection for everyone. We shouldn't have to specify which identity groups, which ethnic groups, which races or religions are protected and which are not. Unfortunately, we live in a world that has become so segmented over the last several decades that you can't be heard. Look what happens when you try to say all lives matter. You get shouted down. You are called a racist. You are told that you are being ridiculous and you are insulting the Black community. No life can matter until Black lives matter. So that's the reality we live in. The reality we live in is that the only way to be heard at this point in time, at this moment in history, is to fight for your rights if you are denigrated and put down and identified as a disadvantaged group. And that's what the Jewish community in many parts of the world is. It's being attacked simply for being Jewish. So ideally, we would be able to say that, no, we fight for the civil rights for all, and we are mindful of that. We're not asking for any special treatment. We're asking for equal protection, for equal treatment. So I understand that concern, but I think that the world we live in, the reality of it, is that we need to be able to stand up for ourselves because no one else seems to be.
Wow, okay. If we were successful in getting Jack Dorsey to take down or prohibit Holocaust deniers from using the platform, might that help stop the Ayatollah of Iran?
You know, I think that it's ridiculous to say that, you know, like him or hate him, Donald Trump was still president of the United States when Twitter took him off their platform. And I think it's hypocritical to say that if you have a policy that all world leaders have a platform, you ban the president of the United States no matter what you think of his speech, but you allow the Ayatollahs of Iran to propagate Jew hatred when we know what that speech is and the evil effect that it has. So that's absolutely ridiculous. And I think Twitter is in a position now where its policies are being exposed to be not helpful to society at large. So this is definitely a moment where we have an opportunity to push Twitter, because what it's doing is inconsistent with its own policies. It's the ultimate arbiter of what is and is not proper speech, which from an American perspective is problematic with the First Amendment. But from a global perspective, once a company, a corporate entity has a policy, it has to apply that policy equally. So if you're barring Donald Trump for hate speech, if you're barring neo-Nazis for hate speech, you have to bar the Ayatollah Khomeini and you have to bar the, Khomeini, like I'm living in the 1980s again, because these things never end. But you have to bar the Ayatollahs. You have to bar all purveyors of hate speech. If you bar one, you have to bar them all. You can't be selective in enforcing your policy. And this, from a legal perspective, this is what equal protection is about. We want to be treated equally. You can't have one person espouse one type of hatred, but ban other people from, speaking because they're deemed as hateful speech. If you ban one, you have to ban all who hate Jews.
Okay, we have someone listening in from Europe, from Switzerland, who wants to know if you're also active in Europe. Will there be Jew hatred activity? Is there a chapter? Can they get involved?
We would absolutely love to have everyone involved, especially in Europe. I think we will be having this coming week for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We have vigils that include Berlin. We would be happy to have partners come on board and help us with vigils in other cities in Europe or around the world as well. We think it's very important to show unity and solidarity and to do everything we can together. We think Switzerland, we think everywhere in Europe is right. There is so much historic Jew hatred in Europe that has not been addressed, that no one is fighting against, that in a systematic and unified way. We have organizations that do that. The Lawful Project has been involved in lawsuits in Europe to protect the rights of the Jewish community, including fighting that awful ban on shahida that the EU courts are now allowing. But we need to come together as a movement in Europe to amplify voices and highlight what's going on. So we would love to have people join us from Europe and around the world. And I will repeat this at the end as well, and maybe we can email this around, but it's www.endjewhatred.com. Very simple, nice place to go. Click on contact, send us a message. We are very happy to respond to you, or contact me directly, gerard@thelawfulproject.org. And I'm very happy to put you in touch with coordinators to help you get going with what you want and what you need to join the movement.
That's great, because I'm hoping several people listening today will follow up. Quick yes or no, is there a chapter in Boston? We have someone interested.
Not yet, but we are working on it. Right now, the closest city is New York, but we are working on it and we're happy to talk to you.
Okay, so hopefully the individual will reach out to you. Do you think that by deplatforming or identifying some of the Jew haters, they will find another venue, they'll go underground, but they won't go away? We're not ending their hatred, we're just trying to take them out of the public square. So what will they do?
Oh, it's nice to say that we will end Jew hatred by X date, or that we can do it in a few years or a few months or a few days. This is part of a process, and the process will take time. But I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that you have, when you deplatform Jew hatred, when you get people to stop propagandizing, it's no longer heard. It no longer indoctrinates the next generation. Just think about college. When I went to college, we didn't have Students for Justice in Palestine. We didn't have this BS, BDS thing. So we didn't have generations to be inculcated in hate. And the people who are my generation or a few years younger and a few years older, they didn't learn Jew hatred in college. Now we have BDS, we have all these groups who are going after our Jewish students on a daily basis. Imagine what would happen if they suddenly went away. You wouldn't just have less Jew hatred, but you would not be indoctrinating the next generation of Jew hate. If California ethnic studies curriculum didn't exist, you would not be indoctrinating the next generation of kids to be into identity politics that considers Jews to be white oppressors. So it all is a step-by-step approach. And the more we can do now to shut down Jew hate, the better chance we have of eliminating it as much as possible down the line. I'm an idealist, but I don't believe we will ever eradicate it completely, but we can make it to the point where, you know, if you nowadays go up to someone and call them the N-word, you are ostracized, you lose your job, you have consequences, so you don't do it. We live in a better world for that. We want that to be the same situation with awareness for the rights of the Jewish community. We want it to be unacceptable socially or legally to perpetuate Jew hate. And that is something I think is accomplishable.
Gerard, can you speak about where the IRA definition of anti-Semitism fits in? Is end Jew hatred promoting it? Is there a strategy around pushing it forward on campuses or other institutions?
I think that's a good question, and that is definitely something that we are very happy to discuss more. It's a topic in and of itself. The short answer is we have been pursuing the implementation of the ARA definition, both at USC, where it's something that we explicitly asked for, more recently at UC Merced, where, you know, partner organizations, including the Lawful Project, have been involved. It is something we see as beneficial. I think that having that definition, especially when people understand what the examples are and that they're not meant to protect politics, but they're meant to protect Jewish identity, I think it is a very useful definition to have. And when I went to college, we had mandatory orientation that included sexual harassment seminars, racial sensitivity seminars. IRA and Jewish identity should be, anti-Semitism should be studied in the same obligatory fashion to make for a better and more cohesive college experience and to teach the leaders of tomorrow that hate against Jews is unacceptable.
Well, I think anti-racist training is now required, so I applaud you if we could get it, education around ending Jew hatred as well. The one's getting a lot of attention, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Do you have a chapter in Baltimore?
Not yet, but we are happy to hear from you, and we are happy to help provide you with whatever support you need to get one off the ground.
Okay, so hopefully that person will follow up with you. Can you talk a little bit about your work, if any, or the recognition you're getting from the legacy organizations, the Jewish, traditional, large, established organizations?
As I mentioned before, we had positive feedback from the Conference of Presidents. I think Malcolm Hoenlein came out and there's a sign of with him holding the End Jew Hatred sign. I think that legacy organizations are going to buy in at one way or the other over time. There's certainly no opposition, but we are not competing with them. We are happy to have them join under the banner to End Jew Hatred, because this isn't about resources or ideology. This isn't about cannibalizing any group's members or agenda. This is about different groups coming together for the greater good and unifying under the one banner that is most conspicuously absent, ending Jew hatred. That's what we're doing. So we have not had any negative reaction whatsoever from legacy organizations. Large organizations that are internationally active have actually come to End Jew Hatred, or we are talking to them about partnering with them on projects or in general. So I think that this is something I'm very excited that this is something that will only grow and become hopefully mainstream in Jewish consciousness.
Great. One of the things that I think people are persuaded by, or might be, is that there's not a lot of expense to being part of End Jew Hatred. It's not like you join a club or pay a membership. It's not like the chapters themselves have to have budgets. Can you talk a little bit about what resources are necessary and what End You Hatred Central provides?
Sure. There are no membership costs. There are no membership fees. I think organizations, usually when you partner with an organization, they come with the member, so to speak, although we're happy to have people join chapters and what they need. The nice thing about, God, I can't believe I'm saying this. The nice thing about the pandemic is that it has shown us that we do not all need to be together in one building to get things done. It has shown us that we can work in a decentralized fashion and still get work done. So think of End You Hatred in many ways as the same thing. You don't need an infrastructure. You don't need a fancy office. You don't need office supplies. Everyone's got access to a printer where you can print things. You know, End You Hatred, the central, if you will, we're happy to help with costs for posters, for actions, for things. You need a megaphone, we can probably help with that. If you need an action to carry out, we can provide logistical support. If you need, you know, copy written, if you need social media designs, that's something that I'm sure we can help with. So it's a matter of, you know, at some point we would love to be able to raise funds for End You Hatred as a whole, to be able to put those funds to use for every chapter and every partner organization undertaking activities. But that's not a concern for individual members. That's something that, you know, to be an activist, you have to show up. Your body is your greatest asset. Your voice is your greatest asset. The ability to stand in front of the Zoom headquarters with a sign demanding an end to Jew hatred, that is the greatest asset we have. And that's not an expensive asset. That's a personal one, and that's the most important one.
I meant to bring the End You Hatred mask to this webinar so I could show people. You actually are providing supplies to the Toronto chapter. We're very happy that End You Hatred Canada will have its first direct action on Holocaust Remembrance Day as a part of a larger movement that you've initiated with, I believe, 6 or 8 or 10 cities already participating. So just to let everybody know, we have the masks that Gerard sent. They arrived today. We will be getting card decals and posters so that people will have signage that says End Jew Hatred and Holocaust Remembrance. So want to make sure people understand that. One of the questions here is whether or not the Israel American Council is involved, and also is Stand With Us part of your partnership group?
The Israel America Council is not involved yet. We certainly have the door wide open for them to be involved, as we have the door wide open for Stand With Us. We do have individual members who Stand With Us, and some people who have worked with them for a long time who have happily gotten on board in their personal capacities to work with us. We haven't had the buy-in from the organization itself yet, but you know, how can you be against ending Jew hatred? This is not about personal agendas or organizational agendas. This is about coming together to end Jew hatred. So we welcome everyone who shares this view, and we are sure that with time, everyone will come on board.
Okay, do you have a chapter near Chico, California?
Chico is where in California? I forget.
I don't know where it is. Northern California.
Well, we've got people in San Francisco, and I think they're organizing as a chapter. So that is absolutely something to consider.
Can you repeat your email address? I have a request here.
Sure. I wish I had a piece of paper to write it up in mirrored form, but my email address is Gerard, Gerard, at the Lawfare, LAWFARE project, that's all in one word, .org. Gerard at thelawfareproject.org. And there's also, www.endjewhatred.com. And we have a sign up form on the bottom where you can put in information as well. It's endjewhatred.com. I saw a question pop up.
There's a question about whether there are End Jew Hatred papers, documents that people should be aware of, or are you writing articles?
We have not, that's something that is certainly in the works. We have not done that yet. We do have prolific talent at writing, and I'm sure that we will be putting together End You Hatred papers that will be out in the media and available on our website as well. We're also very happy to hear what your concerns are and what you think we should be addressing, because that's how we can only see so much, and we react to things that are brought to our attention. But the more people that can point out what we need to focus on, we're happy to help put things together for that.
And I can invite people to check the Canadian site. We are putting up some of the documents that you have already created that might be of use to people, and developing a plan here. So we invite people to check in with caef.ca on that as well. Are you going to be, you mentioned it, but I wasn't quite sure if you're actively pursuing it. You mentioned perhaps having a fund for End Jew Hatred. Is there going to be a fundraising program that includes all of End Jew Hatred, or how do you envision that?
Well, we envision, fundraising for End Jew Hatred, which is essentially money that will be set aside for use by the movement itself. So when you are having, for example, an action and you need certain supplies, or you need to hire a skywriter to write End Jew Hatred over the Canadian Parliament when they're discussing a bill, that's something. I'm using that as an extreme example, obviously, but that's something. That's the sort of thing that we would like to raise money to put aside for, not for for anything other than perpetuating and carrying out actions, and to have that available to disperse to chapters, as they come out with their own ideas for action.
We have a couple of other communities asking. So Florida, is that on your list?
We have a lot of people in Florida, and we are happy to help start the chapter down there.
Okay. And someone mentioned the synagogue that was defaced in Montreal. So I'm going to suggest they get in touch with us, and maybe we can help get a group going in Montreal, since we are just beginning, but we have activities planned for Toronto, right? Can you talk about if you see anything changing? I mean, we hope major changes in terms of support for Jews in America with the new Biden administration. Is there anything specific that End Jew Hatred has in mind? Are you making a representation to the new administration?
We are hopeful, as always, that the new administration will pursue policies that align with our needs and our perspectives. Unfortunately, we are just at the point where we don't really know who the people are who will be staffing these positions or advising the president. We are happy to reach out to them, and will likely do so when it comes to specific issues that we all want to raise. For example, hate on Twitter or on the internet. We are happy to reach out to whatever administration is in power in whatever country to raise our issues and see if we can get results.
Do you think the administration will reverse the executive order that protects Jewish students on campus?
I personally don't think so. I think that executive order is very meaningful to a lot of people, especially the Jewish community, obviously. And a lot of the things that Donald Trump did, whatever else you may think of as politics, were of great help to the Jewish community. And those things, I think it's hard to undo them or take them away without bringing animosity and hatred back to the fore. So I do think that Joe Biden and his administration will walk a very fine line and not reverse and not turn back the clock on things that benefit communities but don't take away from anyone else. So this is one of those things where there's nothing to be lost by keeping it, and I'm optimistic that it will remain.
Okay. I want to give recognition to people that are sending messages from so many different places. So here's another one. Do you have a group in Colorado?
We do not have a group in Colorado. We are happy to talk to you about starting a group in Colorado, starting a chapter there. I think that would be very, very useful. Colorado is one of those states where things have changed so much in the last 20 or 30 years. It's gone from, I don't want to call it a sleepy state, but it has definitely gotten a lot more prominence, and with it comes Jew hatred and all the bad things that stem from that. So we are happy to talk to you about setting up a chapter in Colorado. And
we have Alberto in Brazil. Maybe he'll start a chapter in Sao Paulo. Do you have contacts there?
Well, that would be Alberto, and I encourage him to reach out to me, and we will see, we will talk to him and see what we can do to support his endeavor.
That's fantastic. And what about your contact, if any, with Ilan Carr, the special envoy on anti-Semitism?
I think that I can't speak for NG Hatred because as a movement we have not been involved with him, but we certainly know him at the Lawful Project, and we think that he has done brilliant work in highlighting issues and fighting for Jewish rights and Jewish equality. And we are hopeful that he will remain in his position if he chooses to do so. I think it's a very key role. He has done lots of good, and we hope he will continue to be in a position to help the Jewish community for years to come.
So we don't yet know if he'll be able to stay in that role, whether he's being asked to stay in his role, right?
I think my sense is that there are many things in flux in Washington, D.C., and we will not know probably for months who the final key decision makers are and whether they will remain in positions or change to other departments or other positions. So I think it's too early to tell. We are cautiously optimistic that there will be no great big change on that front.
Okay. Well, and we hope that we also in Canada hope he'll still be there and work with our new special envoy. I don't know if that's the right title for Owen Kotler, who's now been given something of a similar role in Canada. And we will try to make him aware of NG hatred as soon as possible also. Is there anything else that you would like to leave with us to be mindful of? Key points, not only just besides individuals and organizations joining, key points, for example, how to go about prioritizing a target. If we're going to take action and there are so many different things happening, how would you choose where to invest your energy?
Well, in background, let me just say that once you are a partner organization or you start a chapter, you have at your disposal the resources of the NG hatred core, and I use air quotation marks for that. But we have people who are dedicated to and skilled at crafting messages and strategy, and who can help you identify the right target and the right message. And that's the beauty of a movement, is that we are all available to one another. These are things that we can discuss and strategize about jointly and come up with the best way to address a problem and identify the best person to talk to about it. Just as we identified, for example, Rick Caruso, or we identified Zoom and its CEO, we can do the same thing with chapters and partner organizations and help them focus their energies on where to do the most good. But in general, let me just say that the most important thing is taking action. It's joining. It's not just sitting down and writing letters. It's being willing to go and mobilize. That's how you have impact. Back in 2020, I want to say, there was a march following all the attacks at synagogues in New York City and on the subway in Brooklyn, everything that happened around Hanukkah 2019. At the beginning of 2020, there was a march across the Brooklyn Bridge that was attended by thousands of people. That's what we want to see. We need to see people standing together to be heard and counted. Unfortunately, the world we live in has a lot to do with media and optics. And unless you can get people to stand there with a sign and a megaphone and be heard, you're not going to get the same focus from the media, from politicians, or from any key decision makers. So the most important thing right now is to get people together who are willing to show up and help one another, to help the Jewish community.
There's a question here that I think might just help clarify something, and that is, what, if anything, is the difference between what the work you're doing as End Jew Hatred and the Lawful Project? Does it offer something different, or is it one and the same?
The difference is the Lawful Project, we are essentially lawyers. We are happy to put our legal expertise to work, both for individual clients, for the Jewish community, and for NG hatred, as we have been doing. But we're not trained as activists, and that's not something that we came into to being naturally. That's something that we all now do as part of our voluntary effort to be part of this movement. But the distinction is NG hatred is a grassroots movement. It's people deciding to come together for fighting specific issues in the greater battle against Jew hatred. Lawful Project is a founding partner, and it's one of the players. But what we do is we pursue legal strategies. We pursue legal actions. Sometimes we will find that, just as we did in Zoom, that lawfare, for example, will work hand in hand with NG hatred as two prongs. There's a legal approach, and then there's the social justice / activist approach. Other times, there's no real need or benefit from having much legal involvement. When you have people marching on the street to combat a desecration or combat a particular Jew hater, you don't always need a legal avenue. You don't always need an economic avenue. You need people who are offended and want to take action and can take action. So the distinction really is, the Lawful Project, we're lawyers. We specialize in civil rights and human rights of the Jewish community. And Jew hatred is more than that. And Jew hatred is people of all backgrounds coming together to fight.
Okay, thank you. I want to acknowledge Jennifer, who's in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and urge that she get in touch with us if she'd like to get involved and start something in that part of Ontario. And to let everybody that's in the Toronto area know, we do have an event being planned for January 27th. Again, watch for a notice on CAEF, or get in touch with me directly at Andrea, ANDRIA, at caef.ca. And we are working with End Jew Hatred Central, that is providing us with direction and resources and moral support and strategic support that everybody needs to know is very, very helpful. With that, Gerard, I don't have any immediate questions. A lot of people have sent notes to thank you and to thank Brooke Goldstein for her tremendous work. Everyone in Canada is very aware. We're very proud of her because she's from Toronto, right? We like to claim all our own. So we're very happy to be working with the Lawful Project and to be part of End Jew Hatred. And for all of your time, people are very grateful. And so thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all so much for joining us. This is a seminal and historic moment in Jewish history, and I'm glad that we're so many people working together for the cause to end Jew hatred. And I know there are a lot more questions probably that we never got a chance to address. Please feel free to email me, and I will do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. Thank you for having me.
I'll remind people that a recording of this webinar will be available probably later tomorrow, but I will be sending it to everybody that's registered and to everyone on our CAEF list. And I'm sure the Lawful Project will do likewise. So you'll be welcome to then distribute it, share it, push it out. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day. Stay well.